There we go. Okay, now I can see me.
And we're live.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure for me to talk to Jaclyn Goldis. I'd like you to look at how gorgeous she is. But, it's 10 o'clock at night where she is. So, um, anyway, you look absolutely lovely. So, thank you for dressing up. Although I still have a sneaky suspicion you must have been out to dinner or something, and now you're
No, this is all for you. Thank
all
you so
for us. Well, it's very, very flattering. So, anyway, Jaclyn's book this time is called The Safari. She has a copy she can hold up. There it is. Yay. And she's holding it up because we've already sold out our order and we've got it on reorder. So I can't hold one up. But there's lots to talk about. And maybe we should talk about why you decided to set a story in South Africa in a safari park.
Yeah. Well, I love setting books in international destinations. I've been super inspired by my travels. We've talked about that before. I live abroad, so I think it's really fun to armchair travel while you're immersed in a mystery. And I went to South Africa when I left my job as a lawyer, and I decided to travel the world and try for my dream of writing novels. The first actually international destination I went to was South Africa. And Safari in particular really touched me, inspired me. I bookmarked it as a location I would love to set a book in one day. At that time, I was nowhere close to even imagining I was ever going to write thrillers, but I really think it's the perfect thriller location, you know? I mean, you have the luxury resort, you have the wild animals, you have the desperate poachers. You have a very complex country in the backdrop. I think it was primed for a murder mystery. So,
I think a luxury resort can function just the way an Agatha Christie country house can,
yes.
or a cruise ship or any reasonably closed environment. And so, it's a thriller, but it also lends itself to a kind of classic mystery form by having everybody. And because, as you point out, there are wild animals all around, people don't tend to roam beyond the confines of a safari camp without. Now, I was saying to Jaclyn before we started, I have been once. My husband took me to, I looked it up again, Ulasaba Private Game Reserve, the private safari home of Sir Richard Branson and his collection of magnificent lodges. And Ulasaba Rock Lodge overlooks the game-rich bush of the prestigious Sabi Sand Private Game Reserve, which is over on the east coast side of South Africa. So you do have to guard against malaria. There are safari sites closer to Cape Town where, as I understand it, you don't need to worry about that, but it was true of Ulisaba. But I thought for a minute that maybe you were actually writing about Botswana and, the Chobe River area, because I think that is a place where the safari camp you're describing, I think there are more of them in that area. But I might be wrong. Did you visit that part of South Africa before you made a decision about where to set this?
Yeah, so the only safari I've been on is in Kruger. So I think yeah, so I went that route just because I had been. I went to a resort that wasn't as luxury as the one described, but I think there are some of those luxury enclaves in that area. I think I was very close to where you were on safari. But I played with certain things and took certain elements from other places. So I don't know if it's exactly true to what it would be, but I hope it's close.
It's fiction. It doesn't have to be. What I
Yeah.
remember is how totally sleep deprived I was. It's
Really?
a long way.
Yeah, you're waking up so early. Yeah.
It's a long way from here to, I think we flew into Johannesburg. So, it's a Scottsdale to London, to Heathrow, and then Heathrow to Johannesburg, and then you get to the lodge. This comes up in your story that if you really want to catch the animals, you have to get up like 5 in the morning, and they take you out, and you're out in your vehicle with your guide, your armed guide, for quite a while, and then you come back and you have kind of a brunch and a short nap, and then they rust you out again at like 3 o'clock, and off you go again. So I remember, I was fascinated with it, but I was also kind of in a haze. And if I had it to do over, I would have allowed more time before I mean, the safari, I would probably gone to Cape Town and spent 2 or 3 days adjusting to the time change and
Um,
then gone, so that, but it's really a big hit when you travel that distance and then, there you are still doing that kind of thing. But, that the problem with travel is that you don't always understand your destination. It just doesn't work.
yeah,
But it was a marvelous experience. I must say, I never thought of killing anybody while we were there.
I
But
didn't either, to be honest.
yeah,
Not
right.
thankful.
But anyway, so you've made it, and there are quite a number of books out with this general theme, a destination wedding resort for a very complicated family.
Yes.
Interestingly enough, when we were on a cruise somewhere, I can't remember, fairly recently, we met a couple. I wouldn't call them Orthodox, but conservative Jewish couple that
Yeah.
were from South Africa and had a long history there, but they left when apartheid was over. And this is something else you point out in your book, that many white people became impoverished or found it difficult to make employment
Yeah.
once that happened. So they immigrated to England and then ended up in Australia. And it was really interesting visiting with them because I hadn't really thought about, the consequences of that decision. Just like here in the United States, Brown versus Board of Education, which was a 1956 legal decision that killed off segregation in schools, or the idea was that schools all had to be integrated and so forth. But one of the unfortunate consequences is my husband's grandfather, great grandfather, had started the Rosenwald schools, which were schools that he had seeded throughout the South that were only for Black students. And because he was smart, instead of just giving it to them, he gave them seed money and had the communities build their own schools. So they were really valued in the community. They're now a big thing with the National Trust and the Smithsonian and the whole bit. But this marvelous enterprise came to an end with Brown versus Board of Education because the focus of it was to integrate Black students into white schools. But the opposite effect was that the Rosenwald schools closed. And, I often think that lawmakers don't fully think through
Yeah.
the consequence. Well, we're seeing that in action at the moment to an incredible extent, but there's always an anti. I don't know what the word is. There's a reaction, but there's also a anti-reaction when you try to legislate stuff. And so
Definitely.
I thought you really dealt with that very well in the Safari. I'm not saying this is a book about social justice or anything, but
Yeah.
it definitely is in the background of the story, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's impossible to write a book set in South Africa and not, have that be in the backdrop. And I was cognizant of that. And, I did a lot of research for the book, but I think most critically, I spoke to a lot of South Africans, and that helped me understand. I mean, I don't pretend, I'm not South African, so I don't fully understand, but understand enough to be able to write the book there, I hope.
So you have a Jewish family that ranges from the dead patriarch who was increasingly observant, increasingly religious over the course of his life, and then his wife and the children of that family, who had all kind of different views. Um, so it gave you a chance, I thought, to also explore, a modern Jewish family. And I'm sure that there are, just like there would be in Catholic or any other, family where some people were really religious and some people aren't. Um, that's a lot of tension.
Yeah, I think it's really, we see obviously tensions between religions, but I think within religions for sure. And it was interesting to explore that here. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a conservative family, not an Orthodox family, but um, I know a lot of people and I spoke to a lot of people, and it was interesting to kind of try to capture that world and what happens when some people want to be more religious, some less. Yeah, it was, I think there's a lot of conflict that generates, which obviously is good for a murder mystery.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to have conflict to make anything. Or actually, in many ways, the most powerful character in your book is the dead person. I mean,
Mhm.
the person that is dead when the book starts,
Yeah.
during the
Yep.
course of the book. That shadow of that man is so powerful over the entire story.
Yeah.
And I have to say, in my view, in the end, he's probably the most responsible for all the things that happen.
Yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad you said that because I agree.
Well,
Yeah.
you would. And I can't tell you why without spoiling the story,
Right.
but
Right.
it does become obvious towards the end that all the things that happen in the story are really rooted in him, his own behavior and desires. So you made this an extremely wealthy family, and you also wanted to dive into the luxury fashion, although maybe not luxury, but anyway, a very, very large fashion empire. So what interested you with that?
Well, I love fashion and clothes, and I think that's um, it's really fun. And I chose a sustainable fashion company in this book because sustainable fashion is interesting to me, and it's important to me to have like what my fabrics are, the ethics around them, the quality of the fabrics. And I thought it would be really interesting to conceive of sort of a sustainable Zara. But what does that mean? How do you actually have an ethical and sustainable Zara? I mean, it's a conundrum. And so that just automatically generated a lot of conflict that I wanted to create between the characters because it's this succession like family that, are all working in the company in various roles. And so yeah, it was fun. And I always just pick things that I'm curious about learning more about. So I'm into it, but it was really fun to delve into that world and do more research. And I have a cousin who is in the sustainable fashion world and has some similar interests to what I gave the character of Asher. And so she was super helpful and gave me a lot of insight. And yeah.
Well, it was educational to read it, but you're right, it is a conundrum because the whole point of Zara is to have people buy something, wear it for 2 or 3 times, if that, and
Exactly.
dispose of it, then it contradicts sustainability, right?
Yeah,
Because
how can you have sustainable fast fashion? It doesn't really work, but that's what this family is, touting.
right, I particularly enjoyed the attempt to do the leather in a what was it, not a sort of is vegetarian the word I'm looking for? What was
Like
it they were going
using
to do with the
fungal
leather?
dyes and yeah, mm-hmm.
Right. So anyway, we have a fashion empire. We have people at the top of it. So, we could think about Hermes or Estee Lauder or, these very powerful companies, many of whom are not doing well at the moment. So I thought that was, your book kind of strikes at a moment when some of these luxury brands are taking a serious hit, partly
Right.
because partly because China was for a while actually exceeded the US as their biggest market, as far as I can work out. And then they're kind of backing away from that. There's a lot of pressure in China to buy Chinese.
Mm.
Um, so who knows what's going to happen to some of these our local mall here, Fashion Square, remodeled part of it. And I've had authors from New York say that it's really almost better than Fifth Avenue because you walk in and it's just like one high fashion brand after another.
Wow.
You have Chanel here and you have Ferragamo there and you have, I mean, it's just Gucci here. And I was just in Charles de Gaulle flying home from France. And when you finally make it through, all the barriers and you're heading towards your gate, there's an entire block of similar, high fashion. In fact, the lounge is next to Gucci, and you have to walk past Chanel and all this other stuff. And I wonder at this point how many people are really shopping there, or whether it's more like they go in to look. I mean,
Mm,
with Fashion Square, it's not clear to me that there's a huge volume of people actually shopping in those stores. It's more kind of fashion tourism.
interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not shopping there, but I
Oh,
do, watch Real Housewives and I see that a lot of them are shopping there. So I don't know. It seems like they're still making it somehow.
well, yeah, we'll see. But anyway, I think your idea of sustainable but high fashion company is fascinating. So tell us who your cast is. I've already mentioned the dead patriarch, but tell us about the rest of them.
Okay, well, Adelia Babel is the matriarch of the family. She's the CEO of the fashion company we're talking about. She's in her mid 60s, in her prime, and she's about to marry for the second time to a man who's closer in age to her children. And she invites her children and her daughter-in-law and her grandchild, her best friend, who's also her assistant, and she gathers them all for her wedding, which is going to take place in Leopard Sands in Kruger National Park in South Africa, where her family has vacationed for a very long time and where they also have a lot of secrets buried. And, not everyone's thrilled to celebrate the happy couple, and they all convene on safari. But then the morning before the wedding, Odelia is found brutally murdered, and there's still a killer on the loose, and the killer is stalking the rest of the family as its prey.
So she's murdered quite early on, but then you go back in time to, walk us towards the murder scene. Um, Trying to think how I can't say this without giving things away, but you're right. There are loads of buried secrets. Did they actually own Leopard Sands, or they do, don't they?
Yes, they do. Yeah.
Right.
It's like
Okay.
her ex-husband, or her, not her ex-husband, her late husband, founded it. And so it's their land and their resort, and the resort is closed now for the wedding. So it just only hosts the family.
Okay, that's what I thought was the
Yeah.
scenario. So, they have turned away any other paying guests while they are there. And I thought your descriptions, I was really fascinated by the emerald marble. I mean, green's an interesting color,
Oh,
to,
I love that you remember that. Oh my gosh, I'm so
yeah, no, I thought you described the, you know, the luxury. I mean, you talk about the fabrics, you talk about, and you also talk about the fact that for people of this financial level, things are just totally different. There's something that comes along, can't remember what, that kind of destroys the fabric on a sofa. And it turns out to be a $60,000 sofa.
Oh
And
yes.
and she just kind of shrugs it off
Oh,
like,
the stage from the he has like someone stage their house and the ashes fall on the sofa.
right.
Right.
But I mean, for many people, a $60,000 sofa trashed, would be a real
Right.
problem. But
Right.
so I mean, it's true that the rich are really different. And
And it's fun to live vicariously through them and my with my type. I was going to say my pen, but my computer. Yeah.
so some of these people are family, but some of these people are also employees. There's Violette, who is an employee, a South African. She, in fact, represents the white South Africans who can't find work after
Yes.
the end of apartheid. So she's there at the resort. Then we have Gwen, who I'm not sure, does Gwen actually salaried, or she's just kind of part of the family?
Both.
Oh,
Yeah, she's definitely paid,
okay,
but
so she
has
has
A minus roles. Yeah.
yeah, she has a very close relationship with a woman who dies, and then you begin to sense that it's a abnormally close relationship. And I don't mean necessarily in a bad way or
Right.
even sexually, but there has to be some history that would make this relationship so intense. Did you enjoy the tarot part? Because, part of what leads up to the whole the death thing is that there's a card reading. Adia, for all her smarts and her ruthlessness and all, Adia appears to be superstitious. And so, did you use the card reading as a kind of foreshadowing of what's going to happen?
Yeah, I love that you asked that. I love tarot, not doing it personally, but I love getting readings. And I have a tarot reader, and I'm always just so fascinated on how she does it. And so I asked her to help me. I told her, she's in my acknowledgments for sure. She's amazing. And I told her what I wanted my spreads to indicate. And she was so helpful. And that was really fun for me to put
Well,
up
that
to.
was the sort of classic use of foreshadowing, I thought,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
to do
yeah.
that. So, the plus size model, Davina, is that her name? Davina?
Mhm.
Okay,
Divya.
right. there again, I thought that was interesting that a big part of their fashion thing was aimed at plus size women. And because she's had a baby and she's losing weight, there's a conflict there in that, often it's the other direction, but
Right.
she's slimming down and becoming, a different kind of model. And
Yeah.
that leads to a lot of tension because she's married to one of the boys, the CFO, who's slated to become the CEO. Um, and I thought that was interesting too. Why did you decide? I mean, because it could have gone the other way. She could have been really skinny, and then because she was pregnant, she couldn't lose the baby fat, and that would have spoiled things.
Yeah. I think it was fun to turn it on its head a little bit because I think both are true in real life. And I think also the older woman marrying the younger man, both those things were fun for me to turn on their head a bit and play with. And yeah, the character of Davina really came to me. I really saw her. I love how she has her Substack and
Yeah.
she's this like, also she's an older woman. There's a less of an age difference between her and her husband, but I like that she's this like confident older woman marrying a slightly younger guy and but still very much at odds with her mother-in-law who has, some things in common with her, but some very much not. And I thought all of it just created some good conflict.
Well, I mean, one thing you certainly highlight is that child rearing, especially baby rearing, is different. So the mother-in-law is offended that the daughter-in-law is nursing her baby in public.
Yeah.
And I thought about that because, when I had children, nobody nursed their babies in public ever. So, that was kind of intriguing to me to see that Davina has an entirely different attitude about,
Yeah.
and everybody around her has one too. So it's a pretty large cast. How did you keep track of them all?
I actually think that in this situation, like because I've done some thrillers where people are more the same age, then I think it's harder, the same age and the same gender, for instance. Like my first thriller was a girls' trip, all the same age. So I think that was I had to be really attuned to keeping their voices different because, I have all these different points of view. Here, I thought I made it slightly easier for myself with a family, a lot of different, like both, men and women, a lot of different ages. So I felt like they were really distinct in my mind. There weren't any characters that blended together for me. And yeah, I felt like they were each essential. Um, I kept them like clear pretty easily.
So you chose to tell the story from multiple points of view. I mean, we hear from basically everybody. Except the dead man. I keep coming back to him. We do not hear from him, but we do hear from his widow, who inherited the entire empire and has grown it. We hear from her fiance, that was 24 years younger, if I remember correctly. We hear from her son Joshua. She has twins, so we hear from her son Sam.
We don't hear Sam doesn't have a point of view, and neither does Davina.
We don't hear from Sam directly. We only see him through everybody else, but we do see Joshua. We
Right,
can hear from Joshua. We also hear from Violet, who's the
right.
um, local person on the ground. Do we have a chapter from Gwen
We do, and Asher. Yeah,
and
the
Asher?
the husband.
So, and Bailey, don't we have a chapter
Yeah.
from Bailey,
Mhm.
who is Sam, the twin of
Yeah, there's 6 points of view.
why did you choose not to have a chapter in Sam's voice? Because I mean, he's so omnipresent. I guess I just kind of,
Mm.
in my mind thinking that he had part of the conversation.
Oh, I'm glad you feel that. I think he just wasn't essential. I think the other ones, for plot reasons that I won't say, were all essential, like to have points of view, like things you could only find out from that character and suspense I could only or tension I could only create from that point of view. And I don't think the others were essential for it. I thought Sam was the one I thought about having a point of view for, but ultimately opted not.
It's hard to feel a lot of empathy or even like Sam,
Right.
who, and that you really highlight that issue when you have parents who are extremely affluent and their children are brought up in luxury, and therefore they really expect, they mean, they don't seem to even know how to function, on their own. And Sam is, I think, so difficult, because he's constantly angry with his mother that the amount of money he inherited from his father isn't nearly enough. And
Yeah.
but he has no interest in going out and, in any way making money on his own or contributing. He doesn't want to work in the family company, but he doesn't understand how to function outside it. So he's a constant source of aggravation to
Yeah.
everybody.
Yeah, actually, you're making me kind of realize for the first time that this was the first book I really drew on. I've drawn on my experience as a lawyer in other books, especially with, when a dead person makes a will and how they allocate their, which also played into this book. But I think that because I worked as an estate planning lawyer with very wealthy families, and so I saw a lot of, it's not a rule that all people with a lot of money have messed up kids. Definitely not a rule, but I do think that there's a lot of trust fund kids that I saw in practice where, yeah, money doesn't always create like productive, happy adults. And so I do think that there was some of that from my prior career that I infused into Sam, especially.
No, I think you did. I mean, we often see that kids raised in a really affluent household don't really learn any life skills,
Yeah.
because there's always somebody there to smooth the way, or money doesn't really mean anything to them.
Yeah.
And, it can be hard for them to find direction. So Sam, I mean, he's an addict, he's got all kinds of issues, but he's very close to his twin. Now,
Yeah.
Bailey goes the opposite way. So talk to us a little bit about Bailey, because she doesn't want to participate in a Luke's lifestyle. She's much more interested in animals and wearing her basic, Patagonia
Yeah.
cargo jeans or cargo shorts or
Yeah,
whatever.
exactly. I mean, Bailey's one of my favorite characters. She's endearing and sweet and innocent and loves animals. And I love the storyline, her storyline in the book, which I won't spoil. But yeah, I think it was fun to create twins who are quite different, but also have this like deep bond. Because also, I hope that Sam's not like a one note character. He's not black and white. Like the way he is to his sister is where you see his goodness. And so I like that I was able to give him those shades by virtue of his relationship with his sister. And yeah, and their relationship very much plays into the plot of the book too, so I like that it functions for that also.
You did a good job portraying the people who are not immediate family members, but circle around them,
Mm.
and how easy it is for them to just be dismissed if on a whim. If
Yeah,
if the person with the real purse strings gets pissed off at them.
yeah,
Um, and if you've dedicated years of your life and you've gotten used to a certain life and a certain level of, certain lifestyle, the whole bit, and yet you realize that it can all go in an instant. And
yeah,
um, I think that's increasingly true as we're living in an increasingly oligarchic society. That people are so attracted to major wealth, but they don't get to own it. Only one person really gets to own it. Everybody else is kind of a satellite around
right.
it. But it's fascinating right at the moment in this country anyway, and other places, to observe the power of extreme wealth, to I don't know what it is. It's almost like a pheromone or something, where people are
Yeah,
just money,
yeah,
So, and there's a new crime that's come up. I don't know if you recall, but there was a whole thing that went on in Europe about kidnapping people for ransom. Italy was a very bad, a very big place for it, but American business executives, for example, working in foreign countries would be kidnapped and held for ransom. And there was even an insurance industry that came along to, kind of like ransom protection or whatever
Really?
it is.
In Europe, this
Yeah,
was
no, it was a big deal.
happening?
There are a number of crime writers who've written. Jack Switek wrote about it for his Florida guy. Michael Dibdin wrote his first book. He was a marvelous British crime writer, but he said all his books in England, in Italy. His first book was all about this,
Wow.
the kidnapping of wealthy people and holding them up for ransom. Um, but what I read about the other day is that this is now happening to Bitcoin holders, that they are
Mm,
being kidnapped, and the idea is to force them to disgorge the password to the Bitcoin. And there was an arrest, I think, in New York yesterday for like two guys that kidnapped some Bitcoin, guy to
that's
get him to
crazy.
disgorge. And I thought, God, everything comes around again. This is just a new version of
Wow.
this former, kidnap rich people and executives and hold them up for ransom. I mean, Patty Hearst was an example of that, if I remember right. That case a long time ago wasn't, and then she bonded with one of the kidnappers, and that became even more peculiar. So, so rich families had bodyguards to,
Right.
try to protect them. Um, I find that it's just fascinating to me. So one of the things that Adia, the one who's eventually murdered at the beginning of the book, is regretting that she didn't bring her personal security with her.
Yes.
And you couldn't really write this story if she had, but
Right.
I was never totally convinced, to be honest, why she didn't.
Yeah, I understand you. I really had to feel like it was plausible that she didn't. And I think I kind of got there, but I understand you being skeptical about it. I think even while I'm sure I could have gotten around if I had had her security there, gotten around her still
Well,
being
yeah,
murdered, it just would have added extra people, and I couldn't have more people in this cast. So, for both those reasons, I opted for no security. But I understand you saying that.
well, it's just given the number of secrets that we
Yeah,
eventually learned and the number of people around her who were partial to some of those secrets, I thought to
right,
myself that, that it was an interesting decision on her part.
right. But I think it was plausible also that she
Sure,
was
I'm not saying
not not trusting her security also, like who's threatening her. But I agree with you. I think that's fair.
I don't know. I think maybe somebody that, is super rich and all can't necessarily even be confident in their security.
Exactly. Right.
I mean, other people are seduced by money. So, it's perfectly possible that a bodyguard, while you think they're there to protect you, could actually, be taking some kind of a,
Yeah, the
hand up to.
paranoia increases. Right.
So in that sense, her decision might make more sense rather than less sense.
Right.
But it is ironic, as it all turns out, that she had left her personal security out, whether they would have been of any use or not. You
I
know.
also think I didn't say this in the book, but in my head, I'm also thinking, you know, whoever maybe who's planning it, might have dropped a hint to her not to bring security. Who knows? Yeah.
Hey, well, unfortunately, when we have these conversations when a book has just come out, we can't actually talk about some of the really
Yeah,
good stuff,
exactly. Exactly.
which is very frustrating. But anyway, if you've never been on safari, this is an excellent book to read and kind of give yourself a treat, I mean, skipping the murder,
Yeah.
of what it would be like to go to a luxury safari camp and go out. And you do send them out into the bush. And you have some really vivid hunting descriptions. I mean, the lions going after the leopards and the whole bit. Did you observe a lot of that while you were there yourself?
So no, because I mean I did, but I didn't remember what exactly I saw other than kind of looking through my pictures because it was 10 years ago. But I did a lot of research for the safari element, especially. I talked to two guides. Well, I read a ton of books, and particularly books by this author, Peter Allison. I don't know if you've ever read him, but he's amazing. He's a safari guide, and he wrote these really funny memoirs about his time as a safari guide. They're just so good. And so I actually reached out to him and asked him asked him if I could ask him some questions for this book, and he was so generous. And I had a call with him, and then I was emailing him a bit, and he really helped me um, figure out a little more like what safari would be like, but also how my murder was going to work there. And yeah, that was instrumental. I mean, I think we're just lucky now. We're in an age of YouTube videos. And so I could just watch, some videos of of safari taking place in the exact, part of Kruger National Park I want my characters to be in. And so I could see what's going on there and then recreate it a bit. But I knew that, there's a storyline. I don't think this is spoilering, about an elephant, and that was based on a real thing I had seen like while I was doing my research, and so that had inspired that kind of storyline, which ended up being important to the book. And so, yeah, maybe it would have been fun to have even another game drive in the book, but it didn't work out with then I needed them all locked into the compound once the murder happened.
Now, I can remember that when we first went out on the game drive, safari through my haze of exhaustion and all, that the African bush, I had thought of it as more jungly. But the truth is, at least in Kruger, it looks like Southern California.
Yeah.
The wild animal park. I mean, honestly, you can get the same kind of feeling if you go to San Diego, go to visit the wild animal park.
Yeah, yeah.
You really can. I mean, you get into a vehicle that has like it's I assume it's a four-wheel drive or something, but it has either two or three levels of seating. So, you have higher
Right.
up and then this and then this. You have a driver and you have a guide with a gun, and off you bucket and go. And I'd always assumed it was going to be kind of um, denser jungle. Maybe I really thinking of South America or something. But there's a lot of just kind of open land and scrub and little trees they can drive over and the whole bit. So the animals are more visible than I had expected. Now, the goal, a lot of people will go on safari, is there, I think it's five. Do I have that right?
Yeah, the big
Five
five.
major. Right. So it's a hippopotamus, a rhino, an elephant. What is it? A lion,
Leopard,
a
lion.
leopard, and a lion, or yeah, it's not a giraffe because a
I don't
giraffe is not a
Oh,
beast of.
it's also a not a shoot.
Well, there's the buffalo, there's the
The
warthog,
buffalo. The buffalo. It is the buffalo. Yes.
and the hyena. I mean, they're all there. And then there's the monkeys and the whole
Maybe
bit. And
it's
then
not a
there's
leopard. Maybe it's
then
the
there's
lion.
elephants. But and there's a lot of work going on in trying to save the rhino
Right.
from extinction because of the Asian medicine thing. In Botswana, the rangers were actually authorized to kill poachers. Um, we edited a series by an author here called Frederick Ramsey, three of which took place in Botswana in animal parks. And in Botswana, the rangers were really licensed to kill poachers, whereas in
Wow.
South Africa, they're not. But I remember a story that one of our guides told us when we were on our way to wherever it was we were going to catch Rovos Rail to go back to Cape Town. I mean, there's perimeters to a lot of these parks, and an elephant had broken loose through whatever fencing and whatever it is it had, and stormed towards the village. And the rangers went after the elephant, thinking to protect the villagers. And when they got to the village, there was nothing left of the elephant. Well, I mean, the villagers had managed to kill it and strip it and, kind of like moose hunting or something. And
Wow.
so it cuts both ways, that animals are a danger to people, but it's certainly true that people are a big danger to animals.
For sure. For sure. I mean, that was part of the storyline in the book. And yeah, it was heartbreaking some of the stuff I read in the research I was doing.
Yeah, it is. And
Like
then,
they cut, I mean, maybe this is excessive for a live stream, but like what they do to the animals to, have no footprints. Like they could use the hooves of the cut like animal in place of their own feet. They like strap them to their feet, and that's how they're walking through um the dirt so that they don't leave tracks, the poachers. And you know, it's crazy that
They're a
that
really brutal lot. And yet, the poverty is so endemic that for many of
yeah,
them, they can't conceive of any other survival technique. Which,
yes.
but then, you also have, and I've always remembered this story, you have people who go there and they really think they're at the zoo.
Mm,
So one of the other stories that we heard was there was a young couple, I think they were Chinese, but it doesn't really matter, who were, in a private vehicle touring around Kruger or whatever it is, and they were taking photos. So they would stop and get out of their vehicle and take photos. And anyway, they came up upon a group of elephants and got out, standing in the road to take their photos, and the elephants came over and stomped them to death.
wow.
Well, but I mean, because apparently they had no real understanding that these really were wild animals,
Right.
and so I wonder, for many people who go on safari, if there isn't that kind of zoo effect, of thinking that they are in the San Diego, wildlife park and that it's perfectly safe to walk up to or to at least try to observe at close range all these animals.
Yeah, and the Instagram of it all and the selfies and videos don't make it any better.
Well, I heard just coming back from wherever I was coming back from one of the guides that said that the number one cause now of accidental deaths is selfies.
I think I like heard that or saw that. I mean, you see so many stories of people like having deadly experiences, taking selfies in crazy places.
Trying to do TikTok videos and other, nutty stuff. And then, they all seem, I'm sure many of them feel surprised as they're, crashing to their demise. They had some story here about a group of kids that for graduation decided they would do TikTok bombing or something, which they go around the neighborhood and beat on people's doors in the middle of the night and all. And some guy thought he was being invaded by, thieves and all, and he shot and killed one of the kids.
Wow.
And I know. And, I can sort of see that if I were a homeowner roused in the middle of the night by people trying to beat my door down, that,
Yeah.
I mean, this is an open carry state. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, lots of possibilities there. So,
My murder author brain is turning with these new these new
Um,
ideas.
so part of your story, you've set up your beautiful leopard sands, your beautiful safari camp, and you have brought this fractured family together for the wedding of their matriarch, who holds all the purse strings, to a much younger guy, which in itself is probably going to be a recipe for a lot of trouble. And then in order to make it all work, you have to keep unspooling secrets. So how did you must have had to really think that through a lot. Did you, are you an outliner or a plotter? I mean, this story
Yeah.
took a lot of careful construction.
Mm, yes, I'm definitely a plotter. For this one, I had a pretty tight outline, not at the chapter level, but I know the beats and I know the secrets and the twists, and that didn't really change. The only thing that changed, maybe from the conception of it to the writing, was the last chapter, and I won't give anything away, but it was. It's similar, but there were tweaks that were, I think, important to the characters and to the story that I made there. But yes, I really I don't know how I think there are genius authors who write murder mysteries without outlining, but I'm not one of them. I can't imagine just sitting down and saying, let me see like where the story takes me, because I think I'd hit a wall or many walls.
It's so different. I mean, the writers that do that say that if they aren't surprised, then they can't surprise the reader. And, and they really relish the opportunity to just kind of make course to write that way necessarily involves a lot of rewriting.
Right. I
Yes.
think for me, I do a lot in the brainstorming plotting phase. So I think it's almost like I feel like I work through things and discard them and then more. So I think I have that. I'm surprised in that phase. but not the writing phase.
You're a lawyer. You've been taught to think
Yeah.
logically. And, lawyers spend their whole lives going, "What if?" I mean,
Right,
that's
right.
what you're trained to do. And so I think it would. I would be surprised if you were a pantser instead
Yeah.
of a plotter just because of your background. So, what are you working on next? You are a writer of standalones. So, have you thought about repeating any of your characters, or are you moving on to something entirely new again?
I haven't thought about repeating any of them. No, not yet. Yes, I am in like edit phase with my editor on my book that will come out next year. And it's set, I wonder if you've been there actually. It's set in the Azores or Islands off the coast of Portugal, like halfway between. Have you been? Oh my gosh, of course you have.
Yeah, and not a happy experience. My husband had a
Really?
medical incident on a cruise from Miami to Barcelona. And despite the fact that I was sure that he didn't have a heart condition, it turned out he didn't. It was some other thing. It was an infection of I'm trying to remember what it's called. But anyway, cruise ship's entire goal, if anything is really questionable about your health, is to get rid of you. And this is an interesting fact you might want to keep in mind. Therefore, the Coast Guard of whatever country you are adjacent to, the ship is adjacent to, has to come and retrieve the ill passenger, which they do by bringing a helicopter almost all the time, and they have to sync it with the rhythm of the ship, and then they lower some kind of a canvas or something, and winch the person up into the helicopter and fly away. And in this case, it was the Azores where
Really?
Rob was taken. Now, I
Wow.
was so convinced that he really wasn't that ill and that this was, just, I mean, because we were a day from Madeira where there was a real hospital in the whole bit.
Oh,
I'm still mad about this because it was so dangerous, that maneuver. But anyway, so I stayed on the ship because he had his iPad and he was conscious and all. And anyway, so I kept track of him and eventually retrieved him from the Azores.
oh
So
no.
I know, and I thought, and under what possible construction could you think that a well-equipped hospital on a cruise ship could provide less service than a community hospital on an island, stuck
That's
out in the middle of
crazy.
the Atlantic off
Yeah,
Portugal?
because from what I understood, they send people, they like send people to Lisbon from there. Like that's not.
Well, that is what eventually has to happen, is that it turned out it's a really good idea to have an American Express Platinum card because they do have a medical um, function. And so when my husband ended up in the Azores, courtesy of Portuguese Coast Guard or whatever it is, American Express sent a Learjet from Lisbon with a
Oh,
medical
wow.
team and picked him up and
Good.
took him back to Lisbon, where they agreed with me that, take 2 Tylenol and,
Oh
you'll
my
be
gosh.
okay. I know. But that's not the point. The point is the cruise ship wants no liability whatsoever
Right.
for you. And therefore, regardless of whether you are in any, we were once off the coast of East Africa somewhere, in a place that was so dangerous, the cruise ship had canceled its stop there. I can't remember if there was a virus raging or there was something terrible going on. So they canceled the stop. And then some poor man on the ship had a heart attack or something. And the next thing you know, they are helicoptering him right into that area where they had already said it was too dangerous for the rest of us to go. And so you really are at the
That's
mercy of,
wild.
well, it's just a fact of life. I think people should be aware of it, that it is a risk you take if you are on a cruise ship, that if something, you could have a compound leg fracture, you could have all kinds of things that you're going to wind up, courtesy of the local Coast Guard in whatever place you are. Um,
It's really interesting. It's an interesting spin on, I don't know if you heard about, I think in the last year or something, I read this huge article about this group of travelers that were stranded from a cruise ship. Did you hear about this? And it was like there were some older people. It was like 2 weeks and I mean, there were health emergencies there. I think anyway, it was like a crazy story. And because it was because like the trip the like day trip from the cruise was delayed or something, and they didn't wait for them. So then they just stranded them there. So yeah.
Well, yeah, it could depend. I mean, on, so we were at one point right before COVID scheduled to take a very long and interesting cruise from New Zealand down to Antarctica, from the New Zealand side down to the Ross Ice Shelf and all, because we'd already been to Antarctica from South America and all. And I really thought about that, and I was kind of nervous because you were down there away from everything for like a month. And I worried about it some as we're getting older. And then COVID came along and canceled it. And I've never really regretted that because, there's always that chance that you can have an accident or something. So I'm much more conscious now of where we're going. It's one thing, if you have a medical incident off Christchurch, New Zealand, or,
Right.
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 So you do have to think about it. But anyway, that's fodder for you for another book.
It is. It really does make me think. Yeah. All of this can give way to a murder
Well,
mystery.
it's also an unregulated industry, and most of them are
Right.
registered in places where there are really no legal consequences.
Right.
So that's another thing I think often people don't realize is that there's very little recourse
Yes.
if something like that comes up. All right, so that's my travel bulletin for
Yes.
today.
So we
Let's,
need to get you back to the Azores Islands to have a good experience because
well,
they were beautiful. I mean, I only was in San Miguel, but it's beautiful. It
they
was
are beautiful, and Madeira is a wonderful island. It's a bigger island, but I thought Madeira was totally fascinating. It's one of the great examples of tunnel technology, if you've ever been there. I
no,
mean,
I
because it's some kind of giant, I don't know, I assume volcanic cone or something, but
right.
all of the roads are tunneled through
Mm,
the rock and all. I thought it was completely fascinating as a place to visit. I loved
yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Portugal, in fact, as a whole, is a fascinating country all the way around. Right.
Yeah.
So, Ian, come and join us and tell us if, thanks to my monologue, it's Jaclyn's event, which I've hijacked. Sorry about that.
No,
Um,
kind of fascinating, all of your stories.
right. Any questions from the audience?
Yeah, we have a few questions here. First question is, what country are you living in now, Jaclyn?
I am in Tel Aviv. I've been here for 9 years.
How much time did you spend in South Africa?
So I was in South Africa for, I want to say a month. I was on safari only for a few days, and then I was in Johannesburg for maybe 5 days, and then the rest of the time in Cape Town area.
This next question could be a question for both of you. Did the ending surprise you of your book?
Yeah, it surprised me as a reader, although then I thought back to, I think Jaclyn set it up extremely well. So once you see what it is, it makes perfectly good sense that that's the way it played out.
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I'm cutting out. You,
Oh,
You
there you
back?
are.
All right. The,
oh,
the question was, did the ending surprise you? You as a writer, me as a reader. I said yes, it did. But you set it up. Whoop, she's
Oh,
gone.
guess we lost her.
I know. Well, unfortunately, that is she might be able to
Oh,
turn back in. There she comes. There you are. You're
sorry.
back.
I'm back. I hope for good.
there we go.
Well, that's
Okay, did the ending surprise me as a writer? Um, yeah, it did because I think I alluded to the fact that I didn't quite nail it when I first wrote it. And I have an amazing editor, but also my sister is an amazing second editor for me, and she always is like helping me brainstorm things. And when I first finished it, she's like, "No, that's not it," and she was so right. And I wish I could explain why, but between the two of us, we brainstormed the ending that was, yeah, much more fitting. So I'm glad I got there.
Who inspired you to become an author?
Um, I really don't have a memory when I didn't want to be. Since my earliest memory, it's been my dream, and I think just the books I always read. I think like Laura Ingalls Wilder books were some of my first, and just how cozy I felt reading, and I was always writing stories, and Yeah, it was always my dream.
Do you feel safe living in Israel?
Um, it's a hard question. But yeah, I mean, mostly, it's been very challenging living through the war, and there's, obviously so much suffering in this region. Actually, half an hour before our Zoom, there was a siren here, and so the Houthis sometimes send missiles here, and so I have a safe room, and there's all of that. But I do feel generally safe to be here.
Are you planning to stay there long term?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Um, it has its pros and cons as any place. I mean, also there's so much anti-Semitism in America right now, and so, on the flip side, while there's not like as much physical safety, maybe I feel very safe to be outwardly Jewish here, so that's like a positive. But yeah, I have a lot of family here, and I've kind of, I've built my life here, so
Well, if you have family there, that's important.
yeah, it is.
What's more of a challenge for you, how to begin your book or how to end your book?
Oh, I love that question. Um, I was just thinking about that because I'm starting a new project, and it's funny, like I have a funny method that when I'm in the early brainstorming phase for a new book, I at some point write the first chapter and it just spills out of me. And then it takes I won't write the second chapter until I finish plotting the book, but somehow the first chapter, I don't know, comes out near the beginning stage, like I get a voice. And today I wrote the first chapter of my very nascent project. And so I think the last chapter sometimes can flow like that, but like I said about the safari, I think it's usually a little bit harder to nail for me.
And last question, what's the best piece of advice you've been given?
Hmm. I think it's just don't give up. I think if you want something, and for me it was writing books, and I was having a really hard time, finding an agent at certain points of the process. It took me 20 years from writing my first book to when I got an agent and published my first book. And there were so many times I wanted to give up, and I really just I made a contract with myself of like maybe it will never happen, maybe I'll never get published, but I'm never going to stop writing books, and that's what I love, and so I'm going to always keep doing it. And I just think there's power in like agreeing with yourself not to give up and not giving anyone outside power to control like your happiness around something. So that's my best advice.
Thank you very much.
I
Thank
will
you.
say that when you finish this book, um, despite all the revelations and all the rest of it, there's a revelation that you should be able to work out for yourself as the seed of this entire chain of events. And I really like that. So do some serious thinking when you get to the end, and you can really see where everything arises. So that was a good job there, Jaclyn. Thank you. And as I said again, if you've never been on safari, this is your vicarious safari trip, because the lodge, leopard sands, the game drives, all the rest of it are very vivid and very accurate. I mean, I've only done it once myself, but from my own experience, I thought, I could certainly recognize that. So, Jaclyn, it was a pleasure to see you. I'll look forward to your next book whenever that shows up, and we'll do this again.
Oh, thank you so much, Barbara. It's such a pleasure to chat with you as always. Truly, I really look forward to this.
And
Thank you
thank
so
you,
much.
virtual audience. We really appreciate your watching. And for those of you who've sold us out of Safari, thank you very much. And we do have new copies coming. In fact, they should be on their way. So it's a wonderful book to read for summer. You can imagine yourself on vacation, right? So bye, everybody. Thank you. Bye, Jacqueline.
Bye.
Thank you, Ian.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Ian.
Thank you, Jaclyn.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Sorry, I cut out there.
No problem.
All right, well, thank you.
Okay.
I was going to say have a great night, but have a great day.
Great day. You have a great night. We'll maybe see you next year.
Yes, definitely.